The war room fell silent as Admiral Zefter of the Galactic Coalition studied the holographic battle map floating before him. Red markers representing the enemy Void Collective stretched across 3 entire star sectors, while blue Coalition forces had been reduced to scattered clusters of desperate resistance. In just 6 months, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had been brought to their knees. "The situation is beyond critical," announced High Counselor Vexani, her crystalline features reflecting the grim red glow of enemy positions. "The Void Collective has destroyed the Altarian defense fleet, eliminated the Zephyrian battle groups, and crushed the mechanical syndicates. Their bioships adapt to our weapons faster than we can deploy them." The assembled leaders from dozens of species exchanged worried glances. The Altarians had possessed energy shields that could withstand supernovas. The Zephyrians controlled gravity itself as a weapon. The mechanical syndicates built self-repairing battle stations the size of moons. Yet all had fallen to the relentless advance of the Void Collective, and their terrifying ability to absorb and counter any technology thrown against them. "Our projections show complete galactic domination within 2 standard cycles," reported Strategic AI Unit 7749, its synthetic voice carrying an unusual note of uncertainty. "All conventional military responses have proven ineffective. The Void Collective's adaptive capabilities exceed our modeling parameters." Admiral Zefter's 4 eyes focused on a small blue dot at the edge of the map. "What about the humans?" A ripple of dismissive clicks and whistles echoed through the chamber. High Counselor Vexani's expression suggested she had just tasted something unpleasant. "The humans? Admiral, surely you're not serious. They're barely above Stone Age development. Their most advanced weapons still use chemical propulsion. They fight with metal projectiles and explosive devices." "Primitive doesn't begin to describe them," added Defense Minister Kulthun, his tentacles writhing with amusement. "We've observed their military conflicts. They actually use their own bodies as weapons. They throw themselves into battle zones without proper shielding. It's almost disturbing to witness such barbarism." Strategic AI Unit 7749 accessed its databanks. "Humans demonstrate consistently irrational behavior patterns. They frequently engage in combat despite overwhelming odds. They refuse to surrender even when facing certain destruction. Their tactics often violate basic survival instincts. Psychological profile suggests they may be inherently defective." But Admiral Zefter continued studying the small blue marker representing Earth and its modest fleet of crewed vessels. Something nagged at his tactical mind, a detail that others were overlooking. "Tell me about their recent engagements." "Hardly worth mentioning," scoffed Defense Minister Kulthun. "They've had a few border skirmishes with Void scout ships. Somehow managed to destroy several units, though the Collective probably considered them so insignificant they didn't bother adapting their defenses." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Several units? How many exactly?" Strategic AI Unit 7749 hesitated, an unusual behavior for an artificial intelligence. 7 confirmed Void destroyers and 2 cruisers. However, this data appears inconsistent with human technological capabilities. Additional verification may be required. 9 Void ships destroyed by primitive humans using chemical weapons. Admiral Zefter leaned forward. "Show me the battle recordings." The hologram shifted to display a chaotic engagement near Earth's outer planets. Human ships that looked like flying scrapyards faced sleek Void vessels armed with adaptive plasma cannons and reality-bending shields. By all logical calculations, the humans should have been vaporized instantly. Instead, the Coalition leaders watched in stunned silence as human vessels performed impossible maneuvers, using gravity wells and asteroid fields in ways that defied standard tactical doctrine. A human ship half the size of a Void destroyer somehow flanked the larger vessel and delivered a killing blow with what appeared to be nuclear missiles. Technology so crude it was prehistoric by galactic standards. "How is this possible?" whispered High Counselor Vexani. The Void ships should have adapted to their weapons after the first exchange. Perhaps, said Admiral Zefter slowly. The humans are too primitive for the collective to consider worth adapting against. Or perhaps... He paused, studying how human fighters moved in three-dimensional space like predators hunting prey. Perhaps we've been thinking about this war entirely wrong. The War Council erupted in protests and objections, but Admiral Zefter raised his hand for silence. His tactical mind was racing, seeing patterns that others missed. The Coalition had approached this conflict using advanced technology, sophisticated strategies, and predictable tactics. The Void Collective had countered everything because it was designed to face advanced civilizations. We're going to contact the humans, he announced. We need every available ship for the final assault on the Void Collective's main fleet. If we fail, the galaxy falls. Defense Minister Kolthun's tentacles flailed in disbelief. You want to bring primitive barbarians into our last desperate battle? Admiral, they'll be destroyed in seconds. Their presence will only add to our casualties. Or, Admiral Zefter said quietly, they might surprise us all. 3 days later, the human delegation arrived at Coalition Command aboard what could only be described as a weaponized cargo hauler. The ship's hull showed battle scars, hasty repairs, and modifications that made experienced military engineers wince. It moved through space with the grace of a falling brick, yet somehow managed to dock perfectly despite its apparent lack of any recognizable guidance systems, the human commander who stepped onto. The station was not what the Coalition leaders expected. Admiral Sarah Chun was small by galactic standards, wearing a simple uniform that looked mass-produced rather than ceremonial. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes held an intensity that made several alien dignitaries uncomfortable. Admiral Chun, Zefter greeted her formally. Thank you for responding to our request for assistance. Admiral Zefter, she replied with a slight nod. I'll be honest, most of my people think this is a suicide mission. But when someone's trying to wipe out all life in the galaxy, you don't really have a choice but to fight. High Counselor Vexani stepped forward, her tone carefully diplomatic. Admiral Chun, we appreciate Earth's willingness to contribute to this effort. However, you should understand that this final assault faces overwhelming odds. The Void Collective's main fleet contains over 3,000 vessels, each more advanced than anything your species has encountered. Admiral Chun's expression didn't change. How many ships are we bringing? Including your forces, approximately 800 vessels, representing the finest technology and most experienced crews in the galaxy. So we're outnumbered. Almost 4-1 against enemies. That can adapt to any weapon we use. Admiral. Chun nodded as if this was expected news. How long do your projections give us before complete defeat? Strategic AI Unit 7749 answered with mechanical precision. Based on current capabilities and adaptation rates, Coalition forces will achieve less than 12% damage to enemy fleet before total annihilation. Estimated survival time, 47 minutes. 47 minutes to save the galaxy? Admiral Chun smiled grimly. I've worked with worse odds. The alien leaders exchanged glances, unsure if the human was displaying admirable courage or dangerous insanity. Defense Minister Kolthun's tentacles twitched nervously. Admiral Chun, perhaps you don't fully understand the situation. The Void Collective has defeated every advanced civilization in the galaxy. They've countered technology that took millions of years to develop. They adapt faster than we can react. They adapt to advanced technology, Admiral Chun corrected. What happens when you throw something completely different at them? Something so primitive and unpredictable that their adaptation protocols don't know how to respond? Admiral Zefter felt his pulse quicken. This human was thinking along the same lines he had been. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we stop fighting like civilized beings, Admiral Chun said. The Void Collective expects rational tactics, sophisticated weapons, and predictable strategies. They're prepared for everything except one possibility. Which is? prompted High Counselor Vexani. Admiral Chun's smile turned predatory. They're not prepared for humans. As the final briefing concluded and the Coalition fleet prepared for the assault that would determine the galaxy's fate, Admiral Zefter found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans had agreed to take point position in the attack, traditionally the role assigned to the strongest forces. Yet also the position with the highest casualty rates, Admiral Chun, had requested that human ships be distributed throughout the Coalition fleet rather than grouped together. When asked why, her answer had been simple: because when we do what we do best, we want your people to see it. They'll need to understand how humans fight if they're going to follow our lead. The gathered alien commanders had dismissed this as primitive bravado. But as Admiral Zefter watched Admiral Chun reviewing tactical displays with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey, he began to suspect that the galaxy was about to learn something new about warfare, the Void Collectives. The first wave of void ships emerged from the nebula like nightmares given form. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with dark energy, reality warping around them as they approached the Coalition fleet. Admiral Zefter had seen these vessels destroy entire battle groups in minutes, but he had never faced them directly. The sight was more terrifying than any simulation could convey. Enemy fleet consists of 3,200 vessels, reported Strategic AI Unit. 7,749. Adaptive shielding at maximum efficiency. Reality distortion fields active. They're scanning our fleet and beginning defensive preparations. Through the fleet communications, Admiral Chin's voice cut through the tension like a blade. All human vessels execute Pattern Delta. Make it look good. The alien commanders watched in confusion as human ships suddenly broke formation and began what could only be described as a chaotic retreat. The crewed vessels scattered in all directions, their movements appearing panicked and disorganized. Several human ships even collided with each other in their apparent desperation to escape. "What are they doing?" demanded Defense Minister Kolthun, his tentacles writhing in agitation. "They're supposed to be leading the assault." Admiral Zefter frowned as he studied the tactical display. Something about the human retreat felt wrong. Their ships were moving too precisely for genuine panic, and their formation breaks followed subtle patterns that his tactical mind recognized as deliberate. The Void Collective took the bait immediately. Sensing weakness, a large formation of enemy destroyers broke away from the main fleet to pursue the fleeing humans. It was exactly the kind of tactical mistake that the disciplined Void Collective never made except when facing opponents they considered beneath notice. "Now watch." Admiral Chan's voice carried a note of anticipation that made Admiral Zefter's skin crawl. The human retreat suddenly reversed. Ships that had been fleeing in terror spun around with impossible speed and opened fire with everything they had. But instead of targeting the pursuing destroyers, they aimed at empty space behind the enemy formation. "Are they missing on purpose?" asked High Counselor Vexani in disbelief. "Their targeting systems must be even more primitive than we thought." Then, the nuclear warheads detonated. The explosions weren't directed at the void ships. They were positioned to create a three-dimensional maze of electromagnetic interference, radiation clouds, and debris fields. In seconds, the pursuing destroyers found themselves flying blind through a hellscape of obstacles that their sensors couldn't penetrate. That's when the human ships revealed what they had really been doing. Hidden among the debris, human fighters smaller than escape pods emerged like sharks in bloody water. They moved through the radiation clouds as if the deadly environment meant nothing to them, using the chaos as perfect cover. "Impossible," whispered Strategic AI Unit 7749. "Their pilots should be dead from radiation exposure. Their electronics should be fried. How are they still functional?" Admiral Chun's laugh echoed across the communications channel. "You want to know the secret? We don't build our ships to survive everything. We build them to survive just long enough to get the job done. And we build our pilots to operate in conditions that would kill anyone else." The human fighters struck the blinded void destroyers with salvos of missiles that shouldn't have been effective. against adaptive hulls. Except these weren't energy weapons that could be countered or deflected. They were pure kinetic force wrapped around nuclear warheads, delivered with precision that defied the chaotic environment. Void ships that had seemed invincible began exploding in brilliant flashes of light. Their adaptive defenses, designed to counter sophisticated energy weapons and exotic technologies, simply had no response to crude nuclear devices moving at significant fractions of light speed. "First blood to humanity," Admiral Chun announced. "All Coalition vessels begin primary assault. Use everything you've got while they're trying to figure out what just happened." The main Coalition fleet surged forward, energy weapons blazing as they engaged the Void Collective's primary formation. For a few precious minutes, the alien ships seemed confused, their adaptation protocols struggling to process the mixture of advanced technology and primitive weapons. Admiral Zefter watched in fascination as human ships continued their impossible maneuvers throughout the battle. They fought like no military force he had ever observed. Where other species maintained formation and followed doctrine, humans seemed to operate on pure instinct and improvisation. A human cruiser designated Indomitable found itself surrounded by 3 Void battleships. Any rational commander would have attempted retreat or called for support. Instead, the human vessel accelerated directly toward the largest enemy ship, while broadcasting what Admiral Zefter could only assume was their war cry. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Indomitable. We're going to ram the ugly sons of bitches. All crew to impact positions." "Ram them?" High Counselor Vexani stared in horror. "They're going to ram a ship 10 times their size? That's suicide." "No," Admiral Zefter said quietly, beginning to understand. "That's human." The Indomitable's hull began venting atmosphere and debris, but not from damage. The humans were deliberately ejecting everything non-essential, turning their ship into a guided missile. At the last second before impact, escape pods shot out from the vessel like seeds from an exploding fruit. The collision destroyed both ships instantly. But the explosion created a gap in the void formation that 2 squadrons of Altarian fighters immediately exploited. The sacrifice of 1 human ship had saved dozens of Coalition vessels, but Admiral Chun wasn't finished demonstrating human tactical innovation. "All ships, execute Maneuver Zulu," her voice crackled through interference from the ongoing battle. "Let's show them what desperation really looks like." Human vessels throughout the fleet suddenly began acting in ways that violated every principle of military logic. Ships low on ammunition started ramming enemy fighters. Damaged vessels with failing life support flew directly into the most dangerous parts of the battlefield. Crews that should have been evacuating instead stayed at their posts to buy their allies precious seconds. "They've gone insane?" breathed Defense Minister Colthune. "The pressure of battle has broken their minds. They're throwing their lives away for nothing." But Admiral Zefter was beginning to see the pattern. Each seemingly suicidal action created opportunities that other Coalition ships could exploit. Each sacrifice disrupted enemy formations or created tactical advantages that rippled through the entire battle. The humans weren't fighting to win through superior technology or numbers. They were fighting to win through sheer, bloody-minded determination to make every loss count for something. Wing of human bombers approached a void carrier that was launching regenerating fighter swarms. Instead of attacking the carrier directly, they flew straight into the launch bays and detonated their payloads inside the ship's hull. The carrier's adaptive defenses had been designed to counter external threats, not internal explosions. "Target destroyed," reported the bomber wing leader in a matter-of-fact tone, as if flying into the belly of an enemy ship was a routine training exercise. Strategic, AI Unit 7749's voice carried something that sounded almost like excitement. "Human tactical patterns are creating cascade effects throughout enemy formations. Void adaptation protocols appear to be overwhelmed by simultaneous primitive and advanced threats." Admiral Chun's ship, a battered heavy cruiser called Defiance, was now leading a mixed squadron of human and alien vessels in what could only be described as organized chaos. They moved through the battlefield like a pack of wolves, striking where enemies were weakest and vanishing before coordinated responses could be mounted. All vessels. Concentrate fire on Grid 77 Alpha, Admiral Chun ordered. We're going to punch a hole straight through their center line. Admiral Zefter activated a private communication channel. That grid position is defended by their most heavily shielded vessels. Our projections show less than 8% chance of penetration. Admiral Chun's response carried a note of amusement. Admiral, you're thinking like someone who's afraid to lose. We're thinking like someone who's already lost everything and has nothing left but spite. The human-led squadron accelerated toward the heaviest concentration of enemy ships, their motley collection of vessels looking like scavengers approaching a feast. But as they closed distance, something unprecedented happened. The void ships began to retreat. For the first time since the war began, the seemingly invincible enemy was backing away from a direct confrontation. Their adaptation protocols, designed to counter any threat, had encountered something they couldn't process, beings willing to destroy themselves to ensure their enemies shared their fate. They're afraid, whispered High Counselor Vexani in amazement. The Void Collective is actually afraid. Admiral Chun's voice carried across the fleet with grim satisfaction. Fear is the beginning of defeat. All ships, full assault. Show them what happens when you underestimate humans. The coalition fleet surged forward with renewed hope as the enemy line began to waver. But Admiral Zefter knew this was only the beginning. The Void Collective still held overwhelming numerical superiority, and their main command ships hadn't yet entered the battle as if summoned. The Void Collective's reserve fleet materialized in space like ancient gods of destruction awakening from sleep. Each bio ship dwarfed even the largest coalition vessels, their organic hulls pulsing with energies that bent light itself. These were the command vessels that had personally overseen the destruction of entire star systems. Admiral Zefter felt his confidence waver as sensor readings flooded his displays. The enemy reserves outnumbered what remained of the coalition fleet 3-1, and each ship possessed firepower that could level continents. Their adaptive capabilities had grown stronger with every civilization they'd consumed. Coalition Fleet. This is Admiral Chung. The human commander's voice remained steady, despite facing what should have been certain annihilation. We're about to enter the final phase of this engagement. What you're going to see might not make sense at first. But I need every ship to trust us and follow our lead. Defense Minister Kolthun's tentacles writhed in desperation as he watched the enemy juggernauts approach. Admiral Chung, we should consider strategic withdrawal. These ships are beyond anything we can handle. Even our combined firepower would barely scratch their hulls. Minister, Admiral Chun replied calmly, you're still thinking about this as a conventional battle. But humans stopped fighting conventional battles about 10,000 years ago. Watch and learn. The human ships began broadcasting on all frequencies, not tactical communications, but something that made the universal translators struggle to interpret. Music, if the chaotic noise could be called that. Pounding rhythms mixed with human voices, raised in what sounded like battle hymns from a primitive era. What is that sound? Asked High Counselor Vexani, her crystalline features reflecting confusion. That, Admiral Chun said with unmistakable pride, is a CDC thunderstruck to be precise. Human war music. We found that it really helps with the motivation. Strategic AI Unit 7749's voice carried a note of bewilderment. Admiral Chun, these audio transmissions serve no tactical purpose and may actually reveal your positions to enemy sensors. Oh, we want them to know exactly where we are, Admiral Chun laughed. Because we're about to do something so absolutely insane that they're going to remember it for the rest of their very short lives. The human fleet suddenly split into individual ships, abandoning all pretense of formation or coordination. Each vessel began accelerating toward the enemy reserves on a different vector, their movements appearing completely random. To the alien observers, it looked like panic-induced chaos, but Admiral Zefter was beginning to recognize the pattern. The humans weren't attacking randomly, they were positioning themselves to attack. Everything at once, The first human ship reached weapons range of a void command vessel and immediately opened fire with every weapon it possessed. Nuclear missiles, kinetic rounds, and what appeared to be improvised explosives erupted from launch tubes in a continuous barrage. The enemy's adaptive shields absorbed the initial impacts easily, their biohull beginning to pulse with the energy required to counter this new threat. That's when the human ship exploded, not from enemy fire, but from a deliberate overload of its own reactor core. The vessel had intentionally destroyed itself at point-blank range, creating a nuclear fireball that overwhelmed the enemies. Adaptation protocols through sheer proximity and explosive force, first target eliminated, reported the ship's commander in her final transmission. Good hunting, everyone. The Void Fleet reeled in confusion as more human ships began similar suicide runs, each one adapted to counter the defenses they'd observed. But these weren't mindless sacrifices. Each attack gathered data that was immediately transmitted to other human vessels, allowing them to refine their approach. They're learning, Admiral Zefter breathed in amazement. Every ship that dies teaches the others how to kill more effectively. Admiral Chun's voice cut through the chaos of battle. All Coalition vessels begin harassment protocol. Use your advanced weapons to keep them busy while we work. And remember, don't try to save us. We're already dead. We just haven't stopped fighting yet. The human attacks were like nothing ever recorded in galactic military history. They used their own ships as weapons, turned their reactors into bombs, and weaponized their willingness to die. But more than that, they were thinking in ways that the Void Collective couldn't predict or counter. A human destroyer called Vengeance approached a Void battleship that had learned to defend against nuclear explosions. Instead of attacking directly, the human ship began venting its entire atmosphere into space. The cloud of oxygen and trace gases meant nothing to ships designed for void combat. Until the destroyer fired a single incendiary round into the gas cloud, the explosion wasn't nuclear. It was something far more primitive, a fuel air bomb that turned the vacuum of space into a momentary inferno. The void ship's defenses, adapted to counter sophisticated energy weapons, had no response to a simple chemical reaction on such a massive scale. Target neutralized, reported the Vengeance as it drifted powerless through the debris field. Atmosphere depleted. Life support failing. It's been an honor serving with you all. But the humans weren't finished demonstrating their mastery of improvised warfare. Admiral Chen's flagship, the Defiance, approached the largest Void Command ship with its weapons powered down and its shields offline. To the enemy sensors, it appeared to be a damaged vessel seeking surrender. The Void ship moved to capture the human vessel, extending biomechanical tendrils to pull it into a docking bay. That's when Admiral Chun revealed her final gambit. The Defiance wasn't damaged. It was loaded with every nuclear warhead the human fleet could spare, all rigged to detonate simultaneously. But more than that, the ship's hull had been packed with materials from Earth itself. Radioactive elements, toxic compounds, and biological agents that had been gathered from humanity's dangerous homeworld. You want to know what makes humans so dangerous? Admiral Chen's voice carried across the fleet as her ship was pulled into the enemy vessel's core. We don't just come from a world that can kill us. We've learned to kill with our world. The explosion that followed vaporized both ships and created a radioactive cloud that the Void Collective's bioships couldn't approach. Their adaptive defenses had no framework for countering weapons made from the concentrated toxicity of an entire planet. The enemy command structure began to collapse as their largest vessels fell to increasingly creative human attacks. Ships that tried to adapt to nuclear weapons fell to kinetic bombardment. Vessels that hardened against kinetics were destroyed by chemical explosions. Ships that defended against everything were rammed by humans who turned their escape pods into guided missiles. They're not fighting like a military force. Strategic AI Unit 7749 observed with something approaching awe. They're fighting like a natural disaster with tactical awareness. The remaining human ships began coordinating their final assault, but their tactics defied every principle of military science. They shared ammunition between vessels by literally throwing warheads through space. They used their own destroyed ships as cover and weapons platforms. They turned every piece of debris into a potential projectile. Admiral Zefter watched a human fighter pilot eject from his destroyed craft, then use his personal sidearm to detonate a void fighter that passed too close to his position. The pilot died in the explosion, but his action saved an entire squadron of coalition bombers. Admiral, High Counselor Vexani's voice was filled with wonder. They're winning. The humans are actually winning. The Void Collective's formation was in complete disarray. Their adaptation protocols, designed to counter sophisticated threats, couldn't cope with enemies who treated their own deaths as tactical resources. Every defensive measure they developed was immediately countered by humans who found new ways to be lethally creative. The final human assault was led by a single battered frigate that had somehow survived the entire engagement. Captain Sarah Kim, the vessel's commander, transmitted her intentions with characteristic human directness. This is the frigate last stand to all remaining coalition forces. We're going to ram the enemy flagship. I recommend you use the opportunity wisely. Captain Kim, Admiral Zefter opened a channel to the human ship. Your vessel is heavily damaged. You'll never reach the flagship. Admiral, Captain Kim's voice carried a note of grim amusement. You're forgetting something important about humans. We don't know how to quit. The last stand's engines began overloading, pushing the damaged vessel far beyond safe operating parameters. The ship's hull glowed white-hot from the strain, but it continued accelerating toward the massive enemy flagship that had orchestrated the destruction of countless worlds. The void ship's defenses opened fire with everything they possessed. But the human frigate kept coming. Its armor ablated away under the bombardment, systems failed, and hull breaches vented atmosphere and crew into space. But Captain Kim held her course with the determination that had carried humanity from cave-dwelling primitives to galactic warriors. The impact was barely a scratch against the enormous enemy vessel. But Captain Kim hadn't intended to destroy the flagship through collision. She had intended to deliver a message. The last stand's hull contained the accumulated cultural heritage of humanity: art, literature, music,